Tonight, let us wander back to a world where the desert met the river, where gold dust sparkled in the palms of merchants, and where caravans of camels wound their way across the horizon like shadows in the sun. Along the great Niger River, in the heart of West Africa, the Mali Empire was born. Its rise was not sudden, but rather like the slow swelling of a river after the rains steady, inevitable and full of promise. We begin in a land of contrasts, the dry Sahel, where herdsmen followed the stars, and the fertile riverbanks where farmers coaxed millet and rice from the dark soil. Villages grew into towns, and towns into bustling centers of trade. Here, salt was as precious as gold, and gold was abundant enough to dazzle the imagination of kings across the seas. In this land of rhythm and dust, of songs sung under the baobab tree, a young prince once listened to the whispers of destiny. His name was Sundiata, and his story would weave together legend and truth, myth and memory. From his struggles and triumphs would rise an empire that became the richest in Africa and perhaps the world. But beyond kings and armies, it is the quiet lives of ordinary people that filled Mali with spirit. Fishermen casting their nets into the river at dawn, griot storytellers carrying the memory of ancestors in their voices, traders watching the stars as they moved across the Sahara, guiding caravans by night, children chasing one another in the dust, unaware that they lived in the golden heart of history. So, as you close your eyes, imagine the glow of lanterns in Timbuktu, the hum of prayers rising with the dawn, and the steady beat of drums echoing in the distance. This is the story of Mali, of gold and salt, of kings and pilgrims, of wisdom and decline, a tale to carry you into dreams. Long before Mali rose to greatness, another empire had already left its shadow across the western edge of Africa. It was the Ghana Empire, not the modern nation we know today, but a kingdom of warriors, traders, and kings that had flourished centuries earlier. Ghana controlled the golden veins of the land, where dust and nuggets gleamed from the earth, and where merchants from the north crossed the Sahara to barter salt for gold. The rhythm of commerce bound together the desert and the forest, the Arab and the African, the camel and the canoe. By the time the 13th century dawned, Ghana had weakened. Internal rivalries, shifting trade routes, and invasions from the Almoravids had chipped away at its strength. Yet its memory lingered like ruins in the desert, a reminder of what had once been possible, and a spark for what was to come. For in the lands once tied to Ghana's wealth, new powers were stirring. Among the Mandinka people, stories told by griots carried the weight of destiny. They spoke of a prophecy, of a child who would unite the scattered clans and carve out a realm greater than Ghana had ever been. That child was Sundiata Keita, born into exile, weak in body but strong in spirit. Sundiata's early years were marked by struggle. His childhood was remembered as one of ridicule and doubt, for he could not walk until late in his youth. Yet, from the silence of his suffering came the strength that would shape a king. The land into which Sundiata was born was rich in contrasts. The wide floodplains of the Niger nourished rice and cattle, while the dry Sahel stretched endlessly toward the desert. Families gathered at dusk to hear stories of ancestors and heroes. Traders moved between villages with kola nuts, salt, and cloth. The world was alive with exchange, both of goods and of ideas. Islam had begun to spread through the region, carried by Berber merchants. Yet the older spirits of the land, the ancestors, the sacred groves, the whisper of the river, still guided the hearts of many. In this setting, destiny pressed upon Sundiata. His mother, Sogolon, bore the burden of protecting him from rival queens who feared the prophecy that her son would rule. His father's kingdom of Niani trembled under the pressure of enemies, while the rising power of the Soso under their king, Sumaoro Kante, threatened to dominate the region. The griots would later sing of how Sumaoro was no ordinary king, but a sorcerer who commanded spirits and struck terror into his foes. He gathered cities and villages under his banner, enslaved populations, and mocked those who dared resist him. The Mandinka people, fragmented and fearful, saw in him both a tyrant and a storm of fate. It was against this darkness that Sundiata's light would eventually rise. But in these first days, no one could have known the scale of what was to come. A boy once unable to stand would one day unite armies. A people divided by clan and region would rally under a single banner. And from the struggles between freedom and tyranny, the Mali Empire would be born. For now, we remain at the threshold, the fall of Ghana behind us, the shadow of Sumaoro before us, and a young prince gathering the strength to step into history. The Mandinka people remember him as the Lion King, a child of prophecy whose roar would echo across West Africa. Yet Sundiata Keita's path to greatness began not with triumph, but with hardship. His youth was marked by exile, his strength questioned, his future uncertain. In those years of wandering, he carried both the weight of destiny and the lessons of survival. When his father, King Nare Magan of Niani, died, the throne was seized by rivals. Sundiata, still young, was forced to flee with his mother, Sogolon, and siblings. The years in exile were harsh but formative. Moving from one court to another, Sundiata observed kingdoms both weak and strong, allies both fickle and loyal. The griots tell us he learned not only to walk, but to hunt, to fight, and to lead. He grew into a man of resilience, hardened by displacement, yet strengthened by faith in his destiny. Beyond his personal struggle, the land itself was restless. The Soso king, Sumaoro Kante, spread his dominance with fire and fear. He was said to wear a garment of human skins, and to keep the heads of enemies as trophies in his chamber. Cities bowed to him, families were torn apart, and the Mandinka clans scattered in despair. Where Ghana had once ruled with gold and trade, Sumaoro ruled with iron and terror. As Sundiata matured, whispers of his name traveled among the Mandinka people. Those weary of Sumaoro's tyranny began to look toward the exiled prince as a symbol of hope. The griots recount a pivotal moment. Emissaries came to Sundiata, urging him to return and claim the leadership promised to him by prophecy. At first, he hesitated. Exile had made him cautious, and he knew the weight of the challenge ahead. Yet the stories say his mother, Sogolon, reminded him that fate does not wait forever. To lead was his calling. Sundiata gathered allies, princes, hunters, warriors, and even rival clans who recognized that survival required unity. His charisma bound them together. His vision inspired them, and his determination forged them into an army unlike any the Mandinka had ever known. From the Sahel to the forests, warriors joined his cause. Griots compared his gathering to the rising of a great river, swelling until it could no longer be contained. The final test came at the Battle of Kirina, around the year 1235. On that dusty plain, Sumaoro's forces faced Sundiata's coalition. The griots paint the scene with color and sound, the clash of iron, the roar of drums, the prayers whispered to old gods and new. It is said that Sumaoro, the sorcerer king, could not be killed by ordinary weapons. His power bound to a totem of a white cock's spur. Through cunning and courage, Sundiata discovered the secret, and with an enchanted arrow struck down Sumaoro's strength. The battle ended with the Soso fleeing, their power broken. In its place, Sundiata was hailed as Mansa, King of Kings. The Mandinka clans united under his banner, and the Mali Empire was born. But what mattered most was not merely victory on the battlefield. Sundiata's genius lay in weaving together a fragile unity into lasting strength. He did not erase the diversity of his people. Instead, he built upon it. Each clan kept its role: hunters, smiths, traders, warriors, griots, all bound together in a grand alliance. The new empire was not just his creation, but theirs. From exile and struggle, Sundiata had risen. From chaos and fear, Mali had been forged. And though he could not have known it yet, the seeds he planted would one day grow into the richest empire of Africa. A land whose gold would astonish even the kings of Europe. After the dust of Kirina had settled and the Soso menace was no more, Sundiata Keita turned from warrior to ruler. Victory on the battlefield was one thing, forging an empire that could endure was another. The griots say that Sundiata, crowned as Mansa, did not revel in triumph for long. Instead, he called together the clans, chiefs, and elders beneath the wide sky of Kangaba. There, he laid the foundation of a new order, the Charter of Kurukan Fuga. This charter, preserved in oral tradition for centuries, was more than law. It was a covenant of unity. It set out the rights of clans, the duties of families, and the balance of power within the empire. It proclaimed respect for life, for justice, and for the dignity of individuals. Each clan retained its ancient role. Smiths forged iron, hunters protected the people, griots preserved memory, and traders carried wealth across the land. Sundiata bound them together, not by erasing their differences, but by weaving those differences into strength. At the heart of his reign was the capital, Niamey, nestled near the banks of the Niger. From here, Sundiata governed with both firmness and vision. The empire stretched across fertile plains and into the trade routes of the Sahara. Farmers tilled the land, their fields nourished by seasonal floods. Fishermen cast nets into the river, pulling up shimmering catches that fed the cities. Herdsmen followed the rhythm of grass and rain, their cattle providing milk and wealth. Trade became the lifeblood of Mali. Gold dust, collected in gourds and woven into the fabric of daily life, flowed north to markets in Morocco and beyond. In return came salt, to cloth, horses, and books. Caravans of camels crept across the desert, guided by stars, carrying the wealth of Mali to distant shores. Sundiata understood that prosperity lay not only in conquest, but in connection. The griots remember him not only as a conqueror, but as a peacemaker. He honored alliances, welcomed Muslim scholars, and respected the older traditions of the land. In his court, drums and prayers mixed with the sound of merchants bargaining. Beneath the baobab tree, griots recited the lineage of kings, while in the marketplace, traders debated the price of salt. The empire was a tapestry, colorful, complex, and enduring. Yet even in this time of strength, shadows lingered. Unity was fragile, and memories of Sumauro's tyranny were not so easily forgotten. Sundiata knew that law alone could not bind his people. It was story, song, and ritual that would hold them together. The griots became the guardians of memory, carrying the epic of Sundiata across generations. Their words were not mere entertainment, they were history, constitution, and prophecy all in one. In the evenings, under the fading glow of the sun, villagers would gather to hear the griots sing. Children would fall asleep to tales of the Lion King, of his exile, his triumph, and his wisdom. These stories were not simply of the past, but of the present, shaping how people understood their place in the empire. To be Mandinka was to share in Sundiata's victory and to inherit his laws. The empire of Mali, though still young, now rested on firm foundations. Sundiata's vision had transformed a patchwork of clans into a kingdom that stretched across rivers, forests, and deserts. His laws, his alliances, and his legacy would outlast him. But as with all empires, the question was not only how it began, but how it would grow. Beyond Niamey, beyond the Niger, caravans were already whispering of cities like Gao and Timbuktu, places where scholars and merchants gathered. The riches of Mali were only beginning to shine, and soon the world beyond Africa would take notice. As Sundiata's empire matured, its heart pulsed not only with warriors and kings, but with merchants, scholars, and pilgrims. The Niger River, winding like a silver serpent through the land, carried life upon its waters. Canoes laden with rice, cola nuts, and fish drifted downstream, while caravans of camels crossed the desert above. In the meeting of these two worlds, river and sand, Mali found its greatness. Timbuktu, once a humble settlement at the edge of the desert, blossomed into a jewel of commerce. Its markets bustled with traders from across the Sahara, Berbers leading camels heavy with salt, Tuaregs cloaked in indigo, and Arab merchants bearing silks and books. Gold dust from the south passed through their hands, traded for salt slabs cut from mines deep in the desert. To the people of Mali, salt was not merely seasoning, it was life itself, preserving food, strengthening bodies, and fueling survival. Nearby, Gao rose as another vital hub, linking Mali's wealth to distant cities like Marrakesh, Tunis, and even Cairo. From these exchanges flowed not only goods, but ideas. Islam spread deeper into Mali, carried by merchants and scholars, blending with older traditions of ancestor reverence and sacred groves. Mosques of mud brick rose from the earth, their minarets pointing skyward, while Qur'ans copied by hand lay beside the drums and songs of griots. In Timbuktu, knowledge took root. Families who could afford it sent their sons to study under scholars who debated theology, astronomy, and law. The Sankore Mosque became a place of learning, its clay walls echoing with verses and arguments. Though the golden age of Timbuktu would come later, under Mansa Musa and his successors, its seeds were sown in these early years of Mali's expansion. The empire's reach extended far beyond the river. Armies loyal to the Mansa secured territories, ensuring that traders could travel safely. Farmers in the fertile plains harvested rice and millet, their surplus feeding the cities. Herds of cattle grazed in the Sahel, their hides and milk entering the markets. Blacksmiths forged tools and weapons, their furnaces glowing red at night. In every corner of Mali, life was connected by trade, bound by the empire's protection. The griots say that in this time, Mali's prosperity was like the rising of the sun, warm, steady, and impossible to ignore. Foreign travelers began to whisper of a land where gold was so plentiful it could be weighed in dust, where cities gleamed with wealth, and where kings ruled with both might and wisdom. But prosperity carried with it temptation. Rivals watched from beyond Mali's borders, envious of its riches. Ambition stirred within, as governors and generals tested the limits of their loyalty. Sundiata had bound the clans together with law and story. Yet as the empire expanded, the distance between center and frontier grew wider. Communication stretched thin across the deserts and forests. The challenge of holding such vast lands would test the strength of future rulers. Still, for now, Mali thrived. At sunset, the call to prayer drifted over Timbuktu's rooftops, mingling with the chatter of merchants and the laughter of children. The Niger glowed gold in the fading light, reflecting the promise of an empire that seemed eternal. To travelers arriving from the desert, weary and dust-covered, the sight of Timbuktu's markets was like a dream. And to the people of Mali, their land was not just a kingdom, it was the very center of the world. When Sundiata's foundations had settled into strength, generations passed, and Mali grew into an empire admired across Africa. Yet it was under one ruler that Mali's name soared beyond deserts and rivers, reaching even the halls of Europe. That ruler was Mansa Musa, remembered as the richest man who ever lived. Musa came to the throne in the early 14th century, inheriting not only a vast land, but also immense reserves of gold. His rule was marked by stability and prosperity. Fields yielded grain, caravans crossed the Sahara, and cities like Timbuktu thrived as centers of learning. Yet Musa was not content to remain a local monarch. As a devout Muslim, he resolved to undertake the sacred pilgrimage to Mecca, the Hajj, a journey that would display both his faith and his power. In 1324, Musa set out with a caravan, the likes of which the world had never seen. Chroniclers describe tens of thousands of attendants, soldiers, and servants. Hundreds of camels carried gold, each animal laden with shining dust and ingots. Horses trotted in formation, while musicians accompanied the march with drums and flutes. To onlookers, the procession seemed endless, stretching like a golden river across the sands. As Musa's caravan passed through Cairo, the city was stunned. Markets overflowed with his gifts as he distributed gold to the poor, purchased goods, and supported mosques. So generous was his giving that he disrupted the local economy. For years afterward, the price of gold in Egypt and beyond plummeted, a testament to the sheer weight of his wealth. Yet Musa's pilgrimage was not merely a display of riches. He met with scholars and architects, inviting them to Mali from Mecca and Cairo. He brought back books, teachers, and craftsmen. Among them was the famed Andalusian architect Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, who would design mosques and palaces in Mali. Under Musa's patronage, Timbuktu blossomed into a beacon of Islamic learning, with libraries and schools that drew students from across Africa and the Middle East. The pilgrimage transformed Mali's image in the eyes of the world. Maps in Europe, once vague about the lands beyond the Sahara, began to depict a great king seated on a throne of gold, Mansa Musa himself. To merchants in Venice and Genoa, to kings in Spain and France, Mali became a land of unimaginable riches. Legends spread, painting Musa as a monarch whose generosity rivaled his fortune. At home, Musa used his wealth to strengthen the empire. He sponsored the construction of mosques in Gao, Timbuktu, and his capital, Niani. The Sankore University grew into one of the leading centers of scholarship in Africa, where students debated law, astronomy, and medicine beneath the clay walls of its mosque. The call to prayer echoed across Mali, mingling with the rhythm of drums and the voices of griots. But even in this golden age, challenges stirred beneath the surface. Vast wealth attracted envy and ambition. Distant provinces grew restless, tempted by independence. Caravans faced raids on the fringes of the desert. Musa's generosity, though celebrated, strained the empire's reserves. The pilgrimage had elevated Mali to fame, but it had also made the empire a target of both admiration and desire. Still, for those who lived in Musa's time, the memory was one of awe. The image of the golden caravan lingered in songs and stories. Children listened wide-eyed as griots described the day their king crossed deserts and seas, dazzling the world with his faith and fortune. For centuries, the tale of Mansa Musa's pilgrimage would stand as proof of Mali's greatness, a reminder that on the banks of the Niger, a kingdom once shone brighter than gold. When Mansa Musa returned from his golden pilgrimage, Mali stood taller than ever. Its fame had spread across deserts and oceans, and its cities gleamed with new mosques, libraries, and bustling markets. Timbuktu became more than a place of trade. It was a center of knowledge, a city where scholars gathered to teach and debate, where the words of the Quran were copied onto parchment beside treatises on astronomy and law. For a time, Mali seemed invincible. The wealth of gold flowed like a river through the empire. Farmers harvested rice in the floodplains. Traders carried salt from Tagaza, and caravans bound for distant markets crossed the Sahara under Mali's protection. Armies guarded the roads, ensuring that merchants could pass safely. At its height, Mali's domain stretched from the Atlantic coast to the bends of the Niger, covering lands rich in diversity and culture. Yet, beneath the glow of prosperity, fractures began to appear. Musa's generosity on his pilgrimage had drained enormous reserves of gold. Though the empire remained wealthy, its abundance was not without limits. Inflation and disruption of trade values lingered in markets from Cairo to Marrakesh. The empire's neighbors, once in awe, now studied Mali with hungry eyes. Musa himself reigned until around 1337, leaving behind a legacy unmatched. But succession is a test that no empire escapes. His son, Magan I, inherited a throne heavy with expectations. Unlike his father, Magan lacked the strength and vision to command so vast a realm. Governors in far provinces tested their independence. Ambitious generals whispered of rebellion. Rivals like the Songhai watched closely, eager for their chance to rise. The griots say that in these years, Mali was like a great tree, tall and green. Yet with roots beginning to loosen in the soil, the branches still bore fruit, but storms threatened on the horizon. The wealth of Timbuktu remained dazzling, yet its prosperity depended on fragile balance. Scholars debated under the shade of mud-brick mosques, even as rumors of raids drifted in from the borders. For ordinary people, life went on with its rhythms. Farmers bent over their fields. Fishermen pulled nets from the river. Women carried calabashes of water on their heads. In the evenings, griots still sang of Sundiata and Musa, filling villages with pride. Yet there was also unease, a sense that the greatness of the empire rested on foundations more delicate than they appeared. Tales from this time tell of shifting loyalty. Some provincial chiefs hesitated to send tribute to Niani, choosing instead to hoard their wealth. Caravans sometimes fell to bandits despite the empire's patrols. The desert, vast and merciless, remained difficult to tame, though Mali seemed to glow with gold. Its light flickered at the edges. And then came a turning point, a moment that future generations would recall as the beginning of decline. In the mid-14th century, rivals tested Mali's strength openly. The Mossi raiders struck from the south, challenging imperial borders. In the east, the Songhai at Gao, once under Mali's control, grew restless. They began to assert independence. And Though initially contained, their ambition would not vanish. In these years, after Musa, Mali stood at its peak in size and fame. Yet the cracks widened. Wealth, once an unshakable pillar, became a source of instability. Leadership, once guided by giants, now faltered in lesser hands. The empire had dazzled the world, but even the brightest sun begins to set. The Empire of Mali, still vast and golden in the 14th century, began to sense the pull of time's gravity. For decades, the name of Mansa Musa had carried awe from the Sahara to the Mediterranean. But after his death, Mali's crown rested uneasily on the heads of his heirs. Leadership faltered, and the balance of power across West Africa began to tilt. In the east, along the great bend of the Niger, lay the city of Gao. Once subdued by Sundiata's armies and held under Mali's sway, Gao had never lost its pride. Its people, the Songhai, were strong traders and skilled warriors, and they had watched with careful patience as Mali reached its height. Now, with Musa gone and his successors uncertain, the Songhai sensed opportunity. By the mid-1300s, the Songhai leaders began to push against Mali's grasp. Gao reasserted independence, first quietly, then openly. The empire, stretched thin across deserts and forests, struggled to respond with the same force it once had. Campaigns were launched to contain Songhai's ambition, but victory no longer came as swiftly. Where once Mali's armies had swept across the plains like storms, now they stumbled in unfamiliar lands, burdened by disunity. At the same time, threats came from other directions. Mossy horsemen from the south struck deep into Mali's heartlands, raiding villages and testing defenses. To the west, coastal trade routes began to stir, shifting commerce away from Mali's desert caravans. Gold remained abundant, but its flow was no longer unchallenged. The griots tell of Mansa Suleiman, Musa's brother, who ruled for nearly a quarter century after Magan's short reign. Suleiman was a capable leader, restoring some stability. But even he could not hold back every crack in the empire's walls. Internal rivalries between noble families, disputes over succession, and the sheer scale of Mali's territory made unity fragile. Provinces far from Niani grew increasingly autonomous, paying only nominal tribute. For the people of Timbuktu and Gao, daily life still carried a rhythm of trade, prayer, and song. Scholars continued to copy manuscripts, and caravans still brought salt and cloth across the Sahara. Yet the whispers of change grew louder. Traders from the north began to speak more often of Songhai than of Mali. Travelers described Gao as a city rising, while Mali was spoken of as a kingdom struggling to hold its greatness. The empire's borders told the truth no story could hide. Lands once secured under Musa now slipped away. Governors turned their allegiance to local chiefs or to ambitious rivals. The wealth of Mali remained immense, but wealth without strong leadership became both temptation and burden. For ordinary villagers, the changes came slowly. Fields were still planted, rice still harvested. Children still learned the epics of Sundiata under the stars. But as raids increased and tribute collectors became harsher, the sense of belonging to a mighty empire began to fade. The griots sang louder of past glories, as if to hold on to memories that were slipping away. Songhai, meanwhile, grew bolder. Its leaders looked upon the trade of the Niger and claimed it as their own. Though Mali remained formidable, the days when its mere name commanded fear were ending. The rise of a new power cast a long shadow across the Golden Empire. By the close of the 14th century, Mali was still rich, still vast, and still celebrated in distant lands. But the heartbeat of empire no longer matched its stride. Its crown gleamed, yet beneath it, the roots loosened further. The sun of Mali was not yet set, but already the horizon darkened. By the 15th century, Mali's golden glow was beginning to dim. The empire that had dazzled the world under Sundiata and Musa now struggled to hold its crown. Wealth remained, but it slipped more easily through the fingers of kings. Tribute from distant provinces became irregular. Caravans no longer moved as freely, and new rivals pressed upon Mali's fragile edges. The loss of Timbuktu was a wound that cut deeply. For generations, the city had stood as Mali's brightest jewel, a place where merchants, scholars, and pilgrims gathered. But as the empire weakened, Timbuktu slipped from its grasp. Tuareg tribes from the desert seized the city, carving out their own control. Though Mali would reclaim it briefly, the city was never again as firmly tied to the empire. To lose Timbuktu was to lose more than markets and mosques. It was to lose the heart of Mali's prestige. At the same time, Gao and the Songhai grew stronger with each passing year. They built armies, expanded trade, and positioned themselves as heirs to Mali's legacy. Where Mali faltered, Songhai advanced. The Niger, once the lifeblood of Mali's empire, now carried wealth toward its rivals. Raids from the mossy kingdoms of the south became more frequent. Their horsemen swept across the savannah, striking villages and carrying away captives. Along the Atlantic coast, new trade routes began to whisper of opportunities with Portuguese sailors who had appeared on distant shores. Though Mali still commanded much of the Sahara trade, the world was shifting, and the empire struggled to adapt. Within Mali itself, succession disputes gnawed at stability. Rival claimants fought for the throne, weakening the unity that Sundiata's laws had once secured. Provinces acted more like independent kingdoms, some withholding tribute, others turning openly to Songhai. The once mighty armies of Mali, feared across Africa, became fragmented, less disciplined, less certain of victory. For the people of the villages, life grew harsher. Farmers still planted rice and millet, but raids and taxes weighed heavily. Traders faced dangers on roads once guaranteed safe by imperial patrols. Griots continued to sing of the Lion King and the Golden Pilgrimage, yet their voices carried a tone of longing, as though recalling a dream slipping out of reach. Even in decline, Mali retained beauty and resilience. The capital at Niani still bustled. Markets still traded gold dust for salt, and mosques still called the faithful to prayer. Yet the empire's strength was no longer unquestioned. Like a river in the dry season, Mali still flowed, but more shallowly, with rocks breaking through the surface. The world beyond noticed the change. Arab chroniclers who had once praised Musa now wrote of a weakened realm. European mapmakers who had drawn Mansa Musa with a golden crown began to hear new tales of Songhai's rise. The legend of Mali remained, but it was already becoming a memory more than a reality. By the end of the 15th century, the cracks could no longer be hidden. Mali had not vanished, but its crown was fragile, its treasures contested. The empire that once lit the world with gold now flickered like a lantern in the wind. The age of Mali was ending, and a new power, Songhai, stood ready to inherit the river. By the dawn of the 16th century, the Mali Empire was no longer the master of the Niger. What had begun with Sundiata's triumph at Kirina, what had dazzled the world with Musa's golden pilgrimage, now stood as a shadow of its former self. The empire still existed, but its lands were smaller, its armies fewer, its voice quieter. Songhai had risen like a tide. From its base in Gao, it spread along the Niger, absorbing towns and trade routes once under Mali's command. Its kings, like Songhai, marched with disciplined soldiers and fleets of riverboats, projecting a power that Mali could no longer match. Where once Timbuktu and Gao had bowed to Mali, now they became the beating heart of Songhai's empire. For Mali, the loss was not only of land, but of prestige. The golden crown that had defined Africa's greatest empire passed silently into another's hands. Scholars who had once studied in Timbuktu under Mali's patronage now served Songhai's rulers. Caravans bound for the desert looked no longer to Niani, but to Gao. The flow of wealth had changed its course. The griots remember these years with sorrow. They sang of past glories of Sundiata's courage, of Musa's pilgrimage, even as they mourned the shrinking realm. Villagers still gathered to hear the stories, their children's eyes wide with wonder. Yet, behind the songs lay an unspoken truth. The Mali they remembered no longer existed. Internal strife hastened the fall. Disputed successions, quarrels among nobles, and weakened armies left the empire unable to resist. The Mossi raiders struck deeper, carrying captives south. The Tuareg maintained their grip on Timbuktu until Songhai swept them aside. Along the coast, new routes with Portuguese traders bypassed Mali's caravan roads, draining wealth away. Niani itself, once the proud capital, grew quieter. Markets shrank, palaces crumbled, and the authority of the Mansa dwindled. By the late 15th century, Mali was no longer the empire of gold, but a kingdom holding desperately to its core lands. Some provinces still sent tribute, but more acted as independent states, answering only to their own chiefs. And yet, even in decline, the memory of Mali carried weight to outsiders. The name still conjured legends of gold and kings. European explorers wrote of it with awe, though they never saw its true greatness. For the Mandinka people, the empire became less a political power and more a heritage, a source of pride preserved in story and song. The rise of Songhai did not erase Mali, but it overshadowed it. Just as Ghana had fallen to make way for Mali, so too Mali gave way to Songhai. The river of history changed its course, flowing onward with new masters, new cities, new dreams. By the early 16th century, the Mali Empire had slipped into twilight. Its crown no longer commanded fear. Its armies no longer roared across the plains. Yet, in the voices of griots, in the manuscripts of Timbuktu, and in the memories of its people, Mali lived on. For though the empire fell, its story of gold, of salt, of faith, and of kings remained eternal. Empires rise like rivers after the rains, and they fade like streams in the dry season. Mali, once the golden heart of Africa, followed this timeless rhythm, from the struggles of Sundiata to the glory of Mansa Musa, to the twilight under Songhai's shadow. Its story is one of triumph and loss, of brilliance and impermanence. The Niger River still flows, winding its way through the Sahel, feeding fields and villages as it always has. Along its banks, fishermen still cast their nets. Children still chase each other in the dust, and griots still sing beneath the baobab tree. They tell of the boy who could not walk, who became the Lion King. They tell of the king who gave away so much gold that the world's markets trembled. They tell of a people who built cities of knowledge, where books were as prized as jewels. Though the empire faded, its legacy endured. The Charter of Kurukan Fuga, preserved in oral tradition, is remembered as one of the oldest declarations of rights in human history. The manuscripts of Timbuktu, copied by patient hands in clay-walled libraries, to survive to this day, whispering of law, astronomy, and faith. The story of Mali lives not in stone ruins, but in memory, a memory carried forward by words, voice, and song. To Europe, Mali became legend, a place where kings sat on thrones of gold, where caravans glowed in the desert sun. To Africa, it became heritage proof that the continent had nurtured empires as vast and wealthy as any the world had known. And to the Mandinka, it remained identity, the lion's roar echoing in their history. A pride unbroken by time. Empires fall, but people endure. The Malians did not vanish with their empire. They became part of new kingdoms, new nations, their traditions alive in music, in language, in memory. Even today, the kora, a stringed instrument, carries melodies that trace back to the griots who once sang of Sundiata. The rhythms of West Africa still echo the heartbeat of that golden age. So, as we close this story, let us remember that Mali's greatness was not only in its gold or its kings, it was in the resilience of its people, in the wisdom of its laws, in the songs that refuse to be silenced. Empires rise and fall, but memory is a river that never dries. Tonight, as you drift to sleep, imagine the Niger under the moonlight, its waters glimmering softly, carrying whispers of Mali's past. Hear the drums fading in the distance, the call of prayer rising with the dawn, and the voice of a griot reminding us that no empire is truly lost for as long as it is remembered. It still lives. The story of Mali begins and ends with the river, the Niger. Ancient and patient, has always carried more than water. It has carried memory. It has carried song. It has carried the rise and fall of empires. From the banks of Niani, where Sundiata first dreamed of unity, to the markets of Timbuktu, where scholars copied their manuscripts, to the deserts where Musa's caravan glittered beneath the sun, the river was witness. It watched the rise. It watched the glory. And it watched the slow unraveling. Empires come and go. But the river endures. Tonight, as we leave Mali behind, remember that history is not only written in stone or gold, it lives in voices, in stories, in traditions passed from one generation to the next. The griots, with their kora strings and their endless memory, ensured that Mali would never vanish. Even when cities crumbled, their songs kept the empire alive. Perhaps that is the true legacy of Mali, not its treasure, nor its power, but its story. For in the quiet of night, when the stars spread across the Sahel sky, the people of Mali still gather to listen. And as long as the story is told, the Lion King still rises. The golden caravan still marches, and the river still remembers. So close your eyes now. Let the sound of the Niger guide you into dreams. Imagine its waters shimmering beneath the moon, carrying with them the whispers of kings, of scholars, of merchants, and of children chasing one another in the dust. Mali has fallen, yet it lives on, not in crowns or borders, but in memory, eternal as the river itself.